This story takes us to the year 1852 in Scotland, where Ada is a mute woman with a daughter whose marriage had been arranged by her family after she was widowed at a young age. In addition, Ada is an incredible pianist, and she shows her love for the instrument so deeply that she cannot imagine a life without it. The day arrives for her to meet her new husband, so she and her daughter Flora set sail by boat to the lands of her new spouse. The natives offer to take her to her destination. However, they refuse to carry the piano because it is too heavy. Ada informs them that she will not move unless the piano goes with her, so the natives leave her to her fate while they consult with their chief. As a result, Ada and Flora spend the night on the beach. In the morning, Israel, Ada's new husband, arrives, pleased by the beauty of his wife, but feeling awkward because he cannot communicate with her in the usual way. Their subsequent interactions do not improve, as Alistair explains to Ada that they cannot take the piano because they do not have enough people to carry the luggage and the instrument, forcing her to leave the piano in the middle of the beach. After a long journey, they arrive at a small house where they hold a brief wedding ceremony, during which Flora takes the opportunity to tell the servants about her deceased father and Ada's first husband. A famous German composer with whom her mother used to sing, the servants are so intrigued that they begin to interrogate Flora, who explains that her father died after being struck by lightning and that the news robbed her mother of her ability to speak. Later that day, Alistair informs them that he will leave for a few days to purchase lands. The next day, with her husband absent, Ada asks one of the workers, George, to take her to the beach. At first he refuses, but eventually they manage to convince him. Once at the beach, she seizes the opportunity to play the piano enthusiastically while Flora plays in the sand, and George enjoys both the music and the company. Days pass and Alistair returns to find that Ada had even carved a coffee table to resemble a piano, playing it as if it were real and making Flora sing. This startles Israel, who thinks that not only is she mute, but that something must be genuinely wrong with her mind. Hours later, George negotiates with Alistair to buy the piano in exchange for part of his lands, a deal that Israel considers advantageous, even offering that Ada give him piano lessons. When Israel tells Ada about his plans, she shows her anger by writing notes to express her disagreement, but the man imposes his will, arguing that since they are now a family, everyone must be willing to make sacrifices. When the piano arrives at George's house, he reluctantly visits to give her piano lessons, as Alistair had requested. However, he states that he does not want lessons. He only wishes to listen to her play, a request Ada is happy to fulfill. Later that night, while Ada is at home, Israel suggests consummating the marriage, but she shows that she does not want to, so he leaves her in peace. Returning to the piano lessons, Ada plays with inspiration until she is interrupted by George, who tries to insinuate himself. This greatly disturbs her, and she wishes to leave immediately, but George negotiates with her by proposing one visit for each black key on the piano, visits during which she would play and he could ask for favors, promising to give her the piano on the final visit. Desperate to keep playing, Ada eventually accepts the deal. Thus the visits begin, and as time goes by, George asks for increasingly risque favors. He starts by asking her to lift her skirt and then to remove certain garments so he can touch her bare skin, for which Ada begins charging more keys. During one of these visits, Ada surprises George by catching him pulling on her clothes, and she stops him. George then tries to seduce her, but fails miserably, so he asks Ada to lie with him in bed with their clothes on, a proposition to which Ada agrees after charging him 5 keys. However, the final straw comes one day when George catches Ada naked and asks her to charge him as many keys as she wishes in exchange for lying with him in bed naked. After a moment's thought, Ada ends up charging him 10 keys for this act. Meanwhile, Flora, who had been playing outside, decides to peek through the cracks of George's house and sees her mother and George apparently engaging in sexual relations. The next day, Flora plays with other children, reenacting what she had seen her mother do with George by pretending to have relations with a tree. Alistair notices this strange behavior and reprimands her. That afternoon, Flora confesses to Alistair that during the piano lessons, she never heard George play, hinting that they were doing something other than practicing. George then decides to give the piano to Ada, who, confused, goes with him to try to understand why he did that. There, George confesses that he had hoped she would fall in love with him, But that never happened, leaving him miserable and feeling as if he had been selling his body for the piano, a reality he no longer wished to endure. So he preferred to give her the piano to end the arrangement. While the piano is being transported, Ada suddenly realizes what is happening and rushes to George's house, worried that he was returning the piano to undo the deal, and if rejected, would have it sent back to the lands. However, George explains that he expected nothing in return and that he had only given it to his wife because she enjoyed it much more than he did. Once the piano is at home, Ada decides to sit down and play, but she soon realizes that she misses George's presence. Acknowledging this, Ada goes to George's house, where he tells her that the desire he feels for her is making him ill and demands that if she is not going to reciprocate, she should leave immediately. To George's surprise, however, Ada confesses that she has indeed fallen in love with him, and they seize the moment to live in the present. Meanwhile, Alistair, who has been searching for Ada, decides to try his luck at George's house. Upon arriving, he hears strange noises and, peering through a crack, sees his wife and George passionately kissing while undressing. After Ada and George have had relations, he tries to persuade her to come back someday, while Israel listens to everything, having managed to hide under the floor of the house. After this event, Israel finds Ada in the forest, attempting to abuse her, but they are interrupted by Flora, who shouts because the natives are playing her mother's piano. Consequently, Alistair decides to lock Ada and Flora in at night to ensure they do not see George. However, one night Flora is caught sneaking into his room and seducing him, but when he tries to touch her again, she refuses. In the morning, the servants inform Israel that George and the natives plan to leave soon, a piece of news that reaches Ada and makes her play a melancholy melody, reflecting her sadness over her husband's departure. The following night, Ada does the same again, prompting Israel to beg her to let him have her, but once again, Ada refuses. Suspecting that the confinement might be the cause, Alistair decides to unlock the windows and doors of the house, setting Ada and Flora free, assuring them that he will trust them. However, taking advantage of the opportunity, Alistair picks up one of the piano keys and writes a message to George on it, proclaiming him the owner of her heart. He then asks Flora to deliver it, and although she initially refuses because she does not want trouble with Alistair, whom she considers her new father, Ada forces her to do so. Nonetheless, Flora eventually hands the key to Alistair, not wanting to betray her new father and expressing her disgust toward George. Upon reading the message, Alistair is filled with rage. He grabs an axe and leaves with the intention of doing something terrible. Shortly after, Alistair returns empty-handed and attacks Ada, threatening her with the axe and beating her against the walls of the house, blinded by rage and wounded by the betrayal. In his anger, Alistair takes Ada out of the house and, wielding the axe, cuts off one of her fingers, leaving her unable to play the piano ever again. Then he takes the key and gives it to Flora, forcing her to deliver it to George. It is not long before Flora, terrified, arrives with George, who becomes extremely agitated, thinking that Alistair would kill Ada. Meanwhile, Alistair attempts to take advantage of Ada's weakened state. She is unconscious from blood loss. But just as Alistair is about to cross the line, Ada awakens, causing him to cease his carnal advances. Hours pass, and at night Alistair decides to leave armed, apparently prepared to go kill George. George then arrives at his house and points his rifle at Alistair. However, to George's surprise, Alistair reflects and realizes that Ada truly loved him, and he asks her to take him away. Because of this, in the morning, Ada and Flora prepare to leave with George and the natives, boarding the boat along with Ada's piano. While in the middle of the ocean, Ada makes a request that surprises George. She asks him to throw the piano into the sea. At first, George objects, knowing well how much she loves the instrument. But eventually, he decides to respect the wishes of his beloved and throws the piano to the bottom of the sea. However, as the piano falls, a rope tied to it becomes entangled in one of Ada's legs, dragging her along with the piano. When she realizes her predicament, she thinks that everything is over, but miraculously she manages to free herself and return to the surface, a sign she believes that destiny has given her another chance by restoring her voice. Sometime after this event, Ada lives happily with Flora and George, teaching piano with metal fingers as prostheses and gradually learning to speak with her own voice. even though she sometimes thinks of that piano at the bottom of the sea, imagining herself dying with it.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.